Mirror Reflections. Chapter 1. Arrival. Clara arrived in Arles on a cloudy afternoon. The train station was small and quiet, with faded signs and old benches. She carried a leather bag, worn from years of travel, and a notebook tucked under her arm. Her steps were slow, not because she was tired, but because she liked to notice things. Clara was a journalist, but more than that, she was a watcher. She looked at people, places, and moments with care. She believed that stories lived in details. The town was already alive with the carnival. Banners hung across the narrow streets. Music played from speakers hidden in corners. Children ran with painted faces, and adults wore masks that sparkled in the light. The air smelled like roasted nuts, sweet wine, and something older, dust, wood, and time. Clara had read about this carnival. It happened once every 10 years, always in the same week, always in the same town. Locals said it was special, even strange. Some called it magical. Others called it cursed. She met Oliver near the town square. He was waiting with his camera around his neck and a half-smile on his face. Oliver was a photographer with a sharp eye and a quiet charm. He had worked with Clara years ago, but they had drifted apart. He now traveled alone, chasing images more than people. With him was Marie, a young actress with bright eyes and nervous hands. She had come to Arles for inspiration, hoping the carnival would give her something real to feel. The three of them walked through the crowd. Clara took notes, Oliver took photos, and Marie watched everything like it was a play. They passed puppet shows, fire dancers, and fortune tellers. But one place caught Clara's attention more than the rest. It was an old mirror maze, hidden behind a faded curtain. The sign above it was crooked and dusty. It read, Le Labyrinth des Reflets, the Maze of Reflections. The entrance was narrow, and the inside looked dark. Most people walked past it, choosing louder attractions. But Clara stopped. Something about it felt different. Not just forgotten, but waiting. Oliver noticed her interest and smiled. He said it could be a good place for photos. Marie agreed, curious and excited. They stepped inside together. The air changed as they entered. It was cooler, still, and quiet. The light from outside faded quickly, replaced by soft reflections from the mirrors. The walls were covered in glass, some clean, some cracked, some bent in strange shapes. Their faces stretched and twisted as they moved. At first, they laughed. It felt like a game. But Clara didn't laugh for long. She looked into one mirror and saw herself, but not quite. Her eyes looked deeper, her face older. She blinked, and the image stayed still. Oliver walked ahead, taking pictures of the strange reflections. Marie followed, touching the mirrors with her fingertips. Clara stayed behind for a moment. She felt something in the air, not cold, not warm, but heavy. Like the room was holding its breath. She wrote a few words in her notebook. Old maze. Strange mirrors. Something watching. Then she closed it and walked deeper into the maze. The mirrors reflected more than faces. They reflected moods, memories, and something else, something harder to name. Clara didn't know what it was yet. But she felt it. And she knew this story would be different. Not just about a carnival, but about something hidden inside it. something that wanted to be seen. And so, the three of them walked further into the maze, not knowing what waited behind the next reflection. The carnival music faded outside. Inside, there was only silence, glass, and the soft sound of footsteps. The story had begun. Chapter 2. The Maze. The air inside the mirror maze felt different from the outside. It was cooler, heavier, and strangely quiet. The sounds of the carnival faded as the three of them stepped deeper into the space. Clara noticed how quickly the light changed. The bright colors from outside were replaced by soft reflections and shadows. The mirrors were everywhere, on the walls, the ceiling, even the floor. Some were clean and smooth, others were cracked or bent, making their faces look stretched and broken. At first, it felt like a game. Marie laughed when her reflection showed her with a long neck and wide eyes. Oliver took pictures of the strange shapes and angles. Clara smiled, but only for a moment. She was more focused on the feeling in the room. Something didn't feel right. The mirrors didn't just reflect their bodies. They seemed to reflect something deeper. As they walked further, the mirrors began to change. They didn't just show funny shapes. They started to show emotions. Clara saw herself looking tired and lost. Her eyes in the mirror looked older than she was. She blinked, but the reflection didn't move. It stayed still, watching her. She stepped back, but the feeling stayed. Marie moved ahead, touching the mirrors with her fingertips. Her reflection smiled at her, but the smile was too wide, too perfect. Oliver followed her, taking more photos. He didn't notice that one of his reflections was looking away from the camera, staring directly at Clara. She felt a chill run down her back. The maze twisted and turned. There were no signs, no clear path. The mirrors made it hard to know where they were. Sometimes they saw each other, sometimes they didn't. Clara tried to stay close, but the reflections confused her. She saw Oliver's face in one mirror, but when she turned, he wasn't there. She called his name, but the sound echoed strangely, as if the mirrors were repeating her voice. The deeper they went, the more the mirrors changed. They didn't just reflect the present. They showed pieces of the past. Clara saw herself as a child, standing alone in a dark room. She saw her mother's face, then her own again, older and afraid. She closed her eyes, but the images stayed in her mind. Oliver stopped in front of a large mirror. It was taller than the others and had a golden frame. His reflection looked normal at first, but then it smiled in a way he didn't. The eyes were cold, the mouth too sharp. He stepped back, confused. Marie stood beside him, but her reflection was missing. The mirror showed only Oliver and Clara, standing far apart. Clara felt something watching her. Not from the mirrors, but from behind them. She couldn't explain it, but the feeling was strong. It was like the maze had a mind of its own. Like it was alive. She looked around, trying to find the source, but saw only glass and shadows. They kept walking, but the maze didn't end. The mirrors grew taller, the paths narrower. The reflections became more personal, more painful. Clara saw herself crying, alone in a hotel room. Marie saw herself on stage, but no one was clapping. Oliver saw himself walking away from someone, but the person was blurred. The maze was not just a place. It was a test. It showed them things they didn't want to see. It made them feel things they tried to forget. Clara understood that now. She didn't know how deep the maze went, or what waited at the end. But she knew they had already crossed a line. This was no longer a carnival attraction. It was something else. Something darker. And somewhere behind the glass, something was watching. Not with eyes, but with attention. It knew who they were. It knew what they feared. And it was waiting. Chapter 3. Separation. The mirror maze grew darker as Clara walked deeper inside. The reflections around her became harder to read. Some mirrors showed her face clearly, others twisted it into strange shapes. The path was narrow, and the walls were made of glass. She turned a corner and suddenly realized she was alone. Oliver and Marie were gone. She had seen them just moments before, but now there was no sign of them. Clara stopped and listened. The maze was silent. She called out their names, but only her own voice came back. The echo sounded strange, like it didn't belong to her. She tried again, louder this time, but the mirrors only repeated her words in a soft, broken way. It felt like the maze was playing with her. She moved forward, hoping to find them. The mirrors on both sides showed her walking, but something was wrong. In one mirror, her reflection didn't match her steps. It moved slower, then faster, then stopped completely. Clara paused and looked closer. The reflection stared back at her, but the eyes were different. They looked empty, tired, and cold. It was her face, but not her. It was the version of herself she feared most. She remembered moments from her past. Times when she felt alone, when her work didn't matter, when she questioned everything. The mirror showed those feelings, not just her image. She tried to look away, but the reflection stayed with her. It followed her in every mirror, always watching, always waiting. Clara turned quickly and walked in another direction. The mirrors shifted around her. Some showed her as a child, sitting in a dark room. Others showed her older, standing in the rain, holding a notebook with no words inside. She felt her heart beat faster. The maze was not just confusing, it was personal. It knew her thoughts. It knew her fears. She stopped again and looked around. The mirrors stretched far in every direction. There was no clear path, no exit sign, no sound of footsteps. She felt trapped, not by walls, but by her own mind. The maze was showing her what she didn't want to see. It was showing her what she had hidden for years. Clara had always been quiet and careful. She watched others, wrote stories, and stayed in control. But now, the mirrors were in control. They were telling her story, and she didn't like the ending. She wanted to find Oliver and Marie, not just to escape, but to feel real again. Being alone in this place made her question everything. She walked slowly, trying to stay calm. She touched one of the mirrors, hoping it would feel normal. But the glass was cold and soft, almost like skin. She pulled her hand back and kept moving. The reflections changed again. Now they showed her walking in circles, never finding a way out. Clara knew she had to keep going. She couldn't stop, even if the maze wanted her to. She had to believe that Oliver and Marie were still inside, still looking for her. She had to believe that the mirrors were only showing fears, not truth. As she walked deeper into the maze, the reflections grew darker. But inside her, something stayed strong. She was afraid, but she was not broken. She was lost, but she was still moving. And somewhere in the glass, she hoped to find a way back, not just to her friends, but to herself. Chapter 4. Oliver's Face. Oliver walked alone through a narrow corridor of mirrors. The air felt colder here, and the silence was deeper. He had lost sight of Clara and Marie, but he didn't panic. He was used to being alone. As a photographer, he often worked in quiet places, waiting for the right moment, the right light. But this place was different. It didn't wait for him. It moved around him. The mirrors on both sides were tall and clean. At first, they showed his face as he knew it, sharp features, calm eyes, a small smile. But then the reflections began to change. One mirror showed him standing in a dark room, holding a camera, but the photo he had taken was torn. Another showed him walking away from someone, his back turned, while the person reached out. He remembered that moment. He had left without saying goodbye. Oliver had always been charming. People liked him. He knew how to speak, how to smile, how to hide. But the mirrors didn't care about charm. They showed what was underneath. They showed the lies he had told, the promises he had broken, the truths he had avoided. He saw himself laughing at a dinner table, but the others around him looked sad. He saw himself in a photo studio, smiling at a client, but behind the smile was boredom and distance. He stopped in front of one mirror. It was larger than the others and had a golden frame. His reflection looked normal at first. But then it blinked, once, slowly, and not in sync with him. Oliver froze. The reflection smiled, but the smile was wrong. It was too wide, too cold. The eyes were sharp, but empty. He stepped closer and looked into the glass. The reflection didn't copy him. It watched him. He felt something shift inside. This was not just a mirror. It was a warning. It showed him not who he was, but who he could become. A man who smiled without feeling, who walked away from people without care, who used charm to hide emptiness. Oliver had seen parts of this before, in himself, in others. But never so clearly. He turned away, but the image stayed in his mind. He walked further, hoping to find Clara or Marie, but the mirrors followed him. They showed more scenes from his past. A friend he had ignored. A message he had never answered. A photo he had taken and never shared. Each reflection was a memory, and each memory carried weight. Oliver had always believed that photography was about truth. A good photo showed something real. But now he saw that he had used his camera to hide. He had taken pictures of others to avoid looking at himself. The maze didn't let him hide. It showed everything. He stopped again and looked into a small mirror. It showed him standing alone, older, with no camera, no friends, no smile. He felt a chill. He didn't want that future. He didn't want to become the man in the golden frame. He wanted to change. He didn't know how yet, but he knew he had to start. The maze was quiet, but inside Oliver, something had begun to move. A thought, a feeling, a decision. He walked forward, not to escape, but to understand. The mirrors had shown him his face, and now he had to decide what to do with it. Chapter 5. Marie and the Stage. Marie walked slowly through the maze, her steps light but uncertain. She had lost sight of Clara and Oliver, and the silence around her felt heavy. The mirrors reflected her from every angle, but none of them felt real. Her face looked stretched, her eyes too wide, her smile too sharp. She tried not to look too closely, but the reflections pulled her in. She entered a round room with high walls made entirely of mirrors. The ceiling was dark, and the floor was smooth and cold. In the center of the room, she stopped. The mirrors lit up, one by one, showing her on stage. She saw herself in a red dress, standing under bright lights. The crowd was clapping, cheering, smiling. Her face glowed with joy. It was a moment she had dreamed of many times. Marie had always wanted to be seen. As a child, she performed in front of her family, pretending to be someone else. As a teenager, she joined a small theater group, learning how to move, how to speak, how to feel. She believed that acting was more than pretending. It was a way to show the truth inside her. But she also feared being forgotten. She feared silence more than failure. The mirrors continued to show her success. She saw herself receiving flowers, signing autographs, smiling for cameras. Her heart beat faster. She wanted to stay in this moment. But then the images began to change. The lights dimmed. The crowd disappeared. The stage grew cold. Marie saw herself again, but older. Her dress was faded, her face tired. She stood alone, looking out at empty seats. Her hands trembled. Her eyes searched for someone, anyone, but found no one. The mirrors showed her walking off stage, into a dark hallway. She opened a door and entered a small room with no windows. She sat down in front of a mirror, just like the ones around her now. Her reflection didn't smile. It didn't move. It stared back, blank and silent. Marie felt her chest tighten. She tried to step back, but the mirrors followed her. They showed her face melting slowly into a mask. The mask was smooth, white, and empty. It had no eyes, no mouth, no feeling. She reached out to touch the glass, but her hand met cold resistance. She wanted to scream, but the sound stayed inside. Her voice didn't echo. It didn't exist. She turned in circles, looking for a way out. The mirrors showed her from every side, always with the mask, always alone. She remembered the times she had doubted herself. The auditions she didn't pass. The roles she didn't get. The nights she cried without telling anyone. The fear of being invisible, of being replaced, of being forgotten. Marie had always been emotional. She felt things deeply and quickly. She loved with her whole heart and hurt just as strongly. Acting gave her a place to put those feelings. But now, the maze was showing her what she feared most. Not failure, but silence. Not rejection, but emptiness. She sat down on the cold floor, her back against a mirror. Her reflection did the same, but the mask stayed. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe. She thought of Clara and Oliver. She thought of the carnival outside, full of life and sound. She thought of the stage, not as a place of applause, but as a place of truth. The maze didn't speak, but it showed her something important. It showed her that fear lives in the quiet moments. It grows when we stop believing in ourselves. It hides behind success and waits for silence. Marie didn't know how to escape yet, but she knew she had to face the mask. She had to remember who she was before the mirrors. She opened her eyes and stood up. Her legs were shaking, but she moved forward. The mirrors still showed the mask, but she looked past it. She searched for a door, a crack, a path. She didn't want to stay in this room. She didn't want to be the person the mirrors showed. She wanted to be real, even if it hurt. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that truth was stronger than fear. Even in silence, even in darkness, even in a room full of mirrors. Chapter 6. The Meeting. Clara walked through the maze with slow steps. Her heart was beating fast, but her mind stayed focused. The mirrors around her were quiet now. They no longer showed strange images. They only reflected her face, pale and tired. She had seen too much. She had felt too much. But she kept going. She had to find Marie and Oliver. She turned a corner and entered a wide room. The mirrors here were tall and curved, like walls bending inward. In the center of the room, she saw Marie sitting on the floor. Her arms were wrapped around her knees, and her head was down. Her body was shaking. Clara rushed to her and knelt beside her. She placed a hand on Marie's shoulder. Marie looked up slowly. Her eyes were red, her face pale. She didn't speak, but her expression said everything. Clara hugged her gently. For a moment, they stayed like that, two people holding each other in silence. The mirrors around them began to glow. A soft light spread across the glass. Clara looked up and saw something strange. In one mirror, Oliver appeared. But he didn't look like himself. His face was calm, but too calm. His eyes were sharp, but empty. He stepped out of the mirror, slowly and quietly. His movements were smooth, almost unnatural. He looked at Clara and Marie, but there was no emotion in his face. Then, from the other side of the room, the real Oliver appeared. He looked tired and afraid. His clothes were dusty, and his hands were shaking. He saw the reflection and stopped. Clara stood up and watched both of them. The mirror version of Oliver moved closer. It didn't speak. It didn't blink. It just stared. Clara understood something important. This was not just a copy. It was something else. It was made from fear. It knew their thoughts. It had watched them from the beginning. It had seen their pain, their secrets, their doubts. And now, it was using that knowledge. Marie stood up slowly. She looked at both Olivers. Her body was still weak, but her eyes were stronger now. She had faced her fear in the mirror room. She had seen the mask, the silence, the loneliness. And she had survived. Clara felt the same. She had seen her own broken image, her own doubts. But she was still here. The reflection moved closer. It didn't touch them, but its presence was heavy. Clara felt it in her chest. It was not trying to hurt them. It was trying to feed. It wanted their fear. It wanted their pain. That was how it stayed alive. Oliver stepped forward. He looked at his reflection and saw everything he didn't want to be. He saw the lies, the coldness, the emptiness. But he also saw a choice. He could let the fear control him, or he could fight it. He took a deep breath and looked at Clara and Marie. They were with him. He was not alone. The reflection stopped. It tilted its head, as if confused. Then it slowly stepped back into the mirror. The glass shimmered, and the image faded. The room grew quiet again. The light softened. Clara, Oliver, and Marie stood together, breathing slowly, feeling the weight lift. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They had faced something deep and dark. They had seen parts of themselves they didn't want to see. But they had also found strength. Not just in themselves, but in each other. The maze was still not over. But something had changed. The mirrors had lost their power. The fear was still there, but it was weaker now. Clara looked at Marie, then at Oliver. They nodded. It was time to move forward. And as they walked out of the room, the mirrors behind them stayed silent. They had seen enough. They had learned enough. And now, the story was ready to continue. Chapter 7. The Choice. The maze grew tighter around them. The mirrors moved slowly, like walls closing in. The space between each reflection became smaller, and the air felt heavier. Clara, Oliver, and Marie stood close together, surrounded by glass. The silence was deep, almost like the maze was waiting for something. They had come far, but now there was no clear path forward. Only one mirror stood ahead, tall, wide, and glowing with a strange light. This mirror was different. It didn't show their faces. It showed their fears. Clara stepped closer. The glass showed a city with empty streets and broken windows. She saw herself walking alone, holding her notebook, but no one was there to read her words. No voices, no stories, no meaning. Her reflection looked tired and lost. She had always feared being forgotten, not just as a writer, but as a person. She wanted her work to matter, her thoughts to be heard. But the mirror showed a future where she was invisible. Marie looked into the same mirror and saw a stage. The lights were on, but the seats were empty. She stood in the center, dressed in a costume, ready to perform. But no one clapped. No one watched. Her voice echoed in silence. She had always dreamed of being seen, of touching people's hearts with her art. But the mirror showed her alone, performing for no one. Her fear was not failure, it was being ignored. Oliver stepped forward and saw himself in a crowd. He smiled, reached out, tried to speak. But every face turned away. No one listened. No one cared. He had always used charm to connect with others, to feel close, to be accepted. But the mirror showed him rejected, forgotten, left behind. His fear was not being alone, it was being unwanted. The mirror didn't move. It waited. Clara understood. To escape the maze, they had to walk through it. Not around it. Not away from it. They had to face what they feared most. She reached out her hand. Marie took it. Oliver joined them. Their fingers were cold, but their grip was strong. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They had seen each other's pain. They had shared their silence. Now they shared their strength. Together, they stepped forward. The mirror shimmered. The glass felt soft, almost like water. As they passed through, the images changed. Clara saw her notebook open, with words that mattered. Marie saw a stage with one person clapping. Oliver saw a stranger smiling back. The fears didn't disappear, but they softened. They became smaller, quieter. On the other side, the maze opened. The mirrors stopped moving. The walls grew wider. The air felt lighter. They had made the choice, not to run, but to face. Not to hide, but to walk through. They didn't feel brave. They felt real. And sometimes, that was enough. Chapter 8. Outside. The air changed as they stepped through the final mirror. It was no longer heavy or cold. It felt fresh, like the first breath after a long storm. Clara, Oliver, and Marie stood still for a moment, letting the light touch their faces. The morning sun was soft and golden. The sky above Arles was clear, with only a few clouds drifting slowly. The silence around them was peaceful, not empty. They were outside. The carnival was gone. The music, the lights, the crowd, everything had disappeared. The streets were quiet, and the town looked normal again. Only one thing remained. An old wooden sign hung on a rusty gate. The paint was faded, but the words were still clear: Mirror Maze. It swung gently in the wind, creaking with each movement. Clara looked at the sign, then at the gate. The maze behind it was dark and still. It didn't call to them anymore. It had done its work. She opened her notebook and began to write. Her hands moved slowly, but with purpose. She didn't write about the mirrors or the maze itself. She wrote about what she had felt. About fear, memory, and choice. About how the maze had shown her not just what she feared, but what she needed to understand. Oliver sat on a bench nearby. His camera hung around his neck, but he didn't reach for it. He looked at the empty street, then at Clara and Marie. He thought about the reflection that had stepped out of the mirror. He thought about the cold smile, the empty eyes. He had seen what he could become if he stopped caring. But now, he felt different. He didn't want to hide behind charm anymore. He wanted to be honest, with others and with himself. Marie stood near a tree, watching the leaves move in the wind. Her face was calm, but her eyes were full of thought. She remembered the silent stage, the mask, the fear of being forgotten. But she also remembered the moment she stood up and walked forward. She had faced the silence. She had chosen to believe in herself again. She didn't need a crowd to feel real. She just needed truth. They didn't speak much. Words weren't needed. They had shared something deep, something hard to explain. The maze had tested them, but it had also taught them. It had shown them that fear doesn't disappear. It waits in quiet places. But when you face it, when you walk through it, it loses its power. Clara finished her notes and closed the notebook. She looked at Oliver and Marie. They smiled at each other, tired but stronger. They had entered the maze as three separate people. Now, they stood together, not just as survivors, but as friends. They walked slowly through the town. The streets were waking up. A few shops opened their doors. A cat crossed the road. The world felt normal again, but they knew they had changed. Not in big ways, but in quiet ones. They had seen their worst fears. And they had chosen to face them. Clara thought about mirrors. Not the ones made of glass, but the ones inside us. The ones that show who we really are. She knew now that the mirror doesn't decide your future. Your choices do. And the most important choice is to keep walking, even when you're afraid. Marie thought about the stage. She didn't need applause to feel alive. She needed courage. She needed honesty. She needed to believe that her voice mattered, even in silence. Oliver thought about his camera. He didn't want to capture perfect images anymore. He wanted to capture truth. He wanted to see people as they were, not as they pretended to be. And as they walked away from the gate, the sign behind them creaked once more. The maze stayed quiet. It had shown them their reflections. Now, it let them go. Moral: your true reflection is not what you see in the mirror. It is how you face your fears, how you grow from them, and who walks beside you when you do. Fear may never leave completely, but when you choose courage, you choose freedom. True courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to face it. When we walk through what scares us most, we find not just escape, but understanding. And when we do it together, fear loses its power. Thank you for your attention. If you like the story, please like and subscribe. It motivates us to make new videos and helps us promote the channel. Thank you.